Welcome to the 5th Annual Guild of Music Supervisors State of Music in Media Conference.
So thank you guys all for coming. Some of these people on this panel have done, between actually myself and us, we were looking it up the other day, we have over 500 film and TV credits. And that's only the ones that are actually reported in IMDb, which may be more. So what you're dealing with is some of the greatest people who have ever played this game. And people that I looked up to when I started and I still look up to. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the war stories and some of the things we've gone into as far as the build of what their career has been like, and just kind of go from there. So starting on the end, Evan Greenspan, one of the top clearance people in the history of the game. He's cleared copyrights for 120,000 copyrights. Is that what you've done? Give or take. He's done everything from the Emmy Awards to the Academy Awards to he does all the HBO shows. He's done a ton of work, and probably the most prolific and most well-organized clearance gentleman in the history of our business, or one of them, I should say, because that's a big statement. Evan, tell us how you got started in the business.
Okay, you're not going to finish introducing everybody else?
No, we just go one.
I'm the lowly TV guy up here.
It's
We
so
have to
much.
do this how we got started thing?
No, it's a quick. By the way, everything's quick because we only have 1 hour. So these people, we could talk for 5 hours and not get it all done. So we're going to try to do the encapsulated version. So just give us a quick.
Super fast. I studied music. I did historical musicology. I used to play sackbut in the Collegium Musicum at the University of Pennsylvania. That didn't present huge career prospects. I really wanted to work in Hollywood and television. I got into the UCLA theater program, scored a bunch of stage plays there, started scoring television. This was in the late 70s, early 80s, when the idea of composers working in their living rooms started to become kind of mainstream. We were like the first guys that were doing things like that. And in the middle of one of these shows, they said, hey, we need a Madonna song cleared. And I'm like, what does that mean? And they said, well, you're the music guy, figure it out. So I started to research this process, and as I talked to some of the lawyers on this production, they didn't understand what any of this was either, but I said, I understand what this is. So I got to work for a production company called Allen Landsberg, and we had set up a music department there. I worked on a show called Star Search.
Star Search.
Star Search with Ed McMahon. And the people from Star Search wound up at this place called HBO, where they started doing original programming, because at that time it was a movie channel. And I developed software. Look, here's the secret sauce. We developed software, and this was in the 80s. And because nobody had anything that handled this process. So that's really how our process.
Proprietary clearance software.
Correct.
And you've been using that all this time?
Well, we continue to evolve it. In fact, it'll be a web app later this year, we hope. And that's really kind of what's led to the success of the company. And a lot of people sort of make it up as they go along. We have a very organized process. I have a wonderful staff. It's not just me. I have 12 people. And on the Ellen show, we get probably 10 to 12 requests a day, which is 20 to 24 sync and masters. What the software allows us to do is look at past history and say, okay, when you ask for Eminem, Lose Yourself, we can tell you that's probably not going to clear, because he doesn't like to license things for television. If it's a Motown song, and we have 28 successful clearances for that, that's a pretty good bet. And that's us in a nutshell.
Good. That's awesome. Give it up for Evan Greenspan, everybody. This next young lady, Bonnie Greenberg, was much like I helped Hunter get his going. Bonnie helped close the deal to get me into New Line Cinema. Then when there was a house I really want to live by and live in, which I have lived in for the last 20 years, she helped me close that deal too, because there were a director and a producer who owned that house, and Bonnie was like, fuck those other people, give it to McHugh. And they did. So thank you for letting me live in that house for the last 20 years. So
You forgot Jive.
What's that?
Forgot Jive, got you.
Oh, that's what I said. Oh no, I'm sorry, yes. And then later on, when Neil Portnow was looking to hire somebody, she called Neil Portnow and said, you should hire McHugh. So basically the moral of the story is, without Bonnie Greenberg, I'd be homeless and unemployed for the last 30 years. So thank you, Bonnie Greenberg. Anyway, Bonnie Greenberg has also an extraordinary career, done tons and tons of movies, which we'll talk about. But what she also did really interestingly over the last number of years was she went back to school, got a degree in psychology, I believe it is that the correct term? And then she went on to supervise some documentaries that and brought a person in who's a very well-known songwriter who I'll let her talk about in a little bit, who basically helped write 2 songs that got back-to-back Academy Award nominations for 2 films that Bonnie was involved with. So we're going to talk a lot about relationships in this speed hour-long panel and about how that relationship evolved. So give it up for Bonnie Greenberg. So we might as well just jump into it because we don't have that much time. So talk about the Diane Warren of it all.
Hey, first of all, I do want to say, contrary to what Hunter said, I had nothing to do with this panel.
That was a mistake on our
In fact, it was like, why am I even on this? But it was really, they just needed a girl. I'm
Oh,
not
yeah,
a
right.
tie-in.
It's a diversity issue, that's why. Bonnie has no credits,
They
never
had
done any
diversity
work.
problems,
But
so
we
they
have
had
diversity
these tie-ins, and they needed like a little lowly.
Female
person.
type,
They needed
we need a female
a
type.
woman.
So anyway, talk about that Diane Warren story. So Bonnie, let me just real quick. So we did, when I was at A&M Records, we did a film called The Truth About Cats and Dogs. And I did the soundtrack, and we had Suzanne Vega do the lead song. But there were other people involved who were talking about doing the lead song. So why don't you tell that story, because it's a great one.
Okay, this has to do with relationships and how you really want to always stay on board, because what you do one time can come back to haunt you forever. And then sometimes you get a second chance. And this is not my normal voice. My normal one is much worse. It's kind of a loud New York accent. So when we did the movie Truth About Cats and Dogs, there was a songwriter. We were interviewing different songwriters to write a title song. The Suzanne Vega song was actually sung in the body of the film, but we were going to do a title song. So we narrowed it down to a few, and we were having interviews, and now we're going to the final interview in this building. I guess it's public now, so why not? So with Diane Warren. And we walk in, and I don't know if anyone has seen the movie Truth About Cats and Dogs, but it's kind of a Cyrano story about this girl who's a radio veterinarian. It's Janine Garofalo. She kind of falls in love with this guy over the phone. She's afraid to meet him because she perceives herself as incredibly unattractive. So she pawns off her best friend, Uma Thurman, as herself. And then, comedy ensues. So we wait a few weeks for Diane to read the script, and now myself and the director, Michael Lehman, we come here upstairs, have a meeting about the project. We walk in, and after we get through the, chit-chat, I said, so Diane, tell us what you think about the film, what your vision for what this song will be. And she says, Joel, can you hold this for me so I can speak into and act this out? Well, you have the cats and you have the dogs with their hands like that. And I said, I'm sorry, what? And she said, you have the cats and you have the dogs. I said, okay, so you never read the script. She said, what are you talking about? Why are you saying that? And I said, because the movie's not about cats and dogs. I said, so do me a favor, can you show me where the ladies' room is? She said, it's down the hall. I said, no, you show me, please. So we walked down the hall. I said, you never read the script. You're gonna go back in there now. Oh no, and that's when I said to her, you never read the script. I didn't do it in front of the director. Like he didn't know. I said, you're gonna go back in there and you're gonna explain to the director that you never read the script and you're sorry to waste our time, and I will never speak to you again about the film. And that's what happened. And we left, and at least 20 years went by. I would run into her at shoe stores. We had a lot of similar tastes, similar friends, and never. Why don't you come to me for a project? Because I won't, because you lied and said you read a script. And this went on for over 20 years. Until I now, as John said, I went back to school and I became a therapist and I stopped being a music supervisor. But then I realized there was a value to music to help effectuate change in the world. So I decided to get involved doing documentaries with issues that I felt were important. Because it became very clear that some people can be impacted by the written word, and some people by film, and some people by television, and some people by music. So I wanted to help reach those people who were affected by music to come draw their attention to this issue. In this particular case, the first one I did was called The Hunting Ground, and it was about sexual assault on college campuses and the failure of the administration to protect students. So I had this idea that if we had a song written that would reach people, that it would draw them into the issue either to come watch the film or to get more involved in wondering what's going on in the country about sexual assault. And it happened to be I was at a group dinner of which Diane was one of the people. The same week that I was talking to songwriters, who everyone, including myself, everyone was going to work on this for free. So this was not a money gig. And I said to Diane, so again, she said, so how come you never come to me? I said, well, and I reminded her again about, you got the cats and you got the dogs. And I said, but you know what? I have something here that maybe I'd like to talk to you about. And then I asked her if she had any personal experiences, anyone, friends or herself or family with sexual assault, and we talked about it. I told her about the documentary, and would she be interested in writing this song? And that my goal for the song was to ultimately get an Oscar nomination, which was a pretty big goal.
Lofty
Goal, because at that point, there'd only been one song nominated in history for an Oscar, which was Melissa Etheridge for Inconvenient Truth.
From a documentary.
Yeah, for documentaries. So documentaries were not exactly playing ground for Oscar nominations. I said, and I want to bring attention to this issue and blah, blah, blah. And she said, yeah, I think I want to do it. I said, okay, well, let me think about it. And then we went on to the movies and it was over. She said, no, you don't understand. I have to do this. And then she called me at home. She goes, I have to do this. And I said, okay, you're on. And so our 20-year hiatus was over.
Proving you can get a second chance.
And you can't get a
But it
second
may take
chance.
20 years.
Right, and then we worked on this thing, and it was actually, I've worked on probably about 80 or 90 movies, and it was the most time and the hardest work I ever spent to get one song in a film. It was over a year. I had to keep working on it, recutting it, changing it, new demo, this type of demo, that kind of demo, because in the documentary world, directors, the thought of having a song, I don't know if you know the song, but it's all about till it happens to you, you don't know how it feels. It's very much telegraphing what a lot of the characters in this film are experiencing. And for a director of a documentary, they don't want words coming from a song, the words are coming from the screen and from the characters. So it was a very big struggle going back and forth on this with Kirby Dick to figure out how to have this song be part of the film without destroying the storytelling process, but enhancing it. And I worked very, very hard, and ultimately, I mean, it was never a question about the end credit, once we could make it be a sort of triumphant song. The song evolves through people going from victims to survivors to heroes to activists, as does the film. So the song telegraphs the same story as the film. But earlier on, we did another version where, and I can say when I recorded this with Lady Gaga, I was in the booth with her showing her the footage, and she sang this section to the footage, and every take, she was crying hysterically, and we'd have to start again, because she personally had experienced, she had been raped 9 years prior, and had held it in, because she, just like characters in the movie, and just like many people throughout the world, there's a tremendous stigma and shame that seems to be attached to sexual assault, and people don't want to come forward with it, and she was one of them, and she was very open at that point then about how it destroyed her life. So this was just her on the piano as the first character we meet in the film is walking around campus telling how she felt about being violated. And then she just walks silently, and Lady Gaga sings very softly at the piano, you know, till it happens to you, you don't know how it feels. And it's just about a 35-second thing with a little piano. And then we don't hear it till the end, and we hear a much different version. But just to get to that, literally was a year of in and out of the editing room, and different versions and different instrumentation and all sorts of different things. But I am proud to say, not that this might be part of this panel, that I don't know if any of you saw, the song was nominated ultimately for an Oscar. It actually is the only film song in history to ever be nominated for an Oscar, an Emmy, and a Grammy. But that's not so much of the song, because usually you're not eligible for all three, but because it was a TV film also. And at the Oscars, Joe Biden introduced her, and she was on stage and had like 50 rape victims on the stage with her.
It was an amazing moment.
And the next morning, rape lines went up 20% around America. And I had a personal experience here at this Guild event the same year that had happened, and there was a woman standing in the corner waiting to speak again to me, and I thought, oh my God, I created a whole narrative. She's waiting to get a job as an intern. I'm gonna have to tell her I'm not a music supervisor anymore, that I really work as a shrink. And I created an entire story of why this woman was waiting in the wings for me. And the panel ended, and all the questions ended, and she walked up to me, and she said, I just want you to know, I've been married 25 years, and I was raped 27 years ago. And I never told my husband till after we watched the Oscars. Now, watching Lady Gaga gave me the courage to speak to my husband. And I'm not even the songwriter, I was just the music supervisor. So I can imagine how many people walk up to Gaga or Diane. But anyway, the point is that it proved to me that there is validity to that that you can reach people through music who might not be reached other ways, that you can effectuate change, that you can trigger a conversation. And Diane hit it out of the park. And so since then, we've now done 5 together. We had one that opened last night on childhood trauma, that Macy Gray sang. We had one on teenage homelessness. We did one on RPG. And so, because that's the other thing, when people really do a great job, why go to someone else? Why not reward them for their talent and their success and their,
So
and their
that's
skills?
a great segue, because relationships, obviously, in this business, how to be diplomatic, to build, to start, build, and grow relationships. So obviously, Joel, you've had an unbelievable career. You've gone everything, 8 million selling Forrest Gump, started on a little movie called Easy Rider, heads of, running studios like Paramount, Warner Brothers, doing the music. But talk about the relationship that you formed with Taylor Hackford, who's one of the great directors who, with a great sense of music and a great sense of vibe. Talk about how that relationship was built and some of the your favorite collaborations from that, and what you think it takes to build and keep those relationships.
Thanks. I met Taylor at Paramount when he was directing his second film called An Officer and a Gentleman. And at the time, I thought that I was hot shit when it came to temping films with source music. And Taylor brought his first director's cut back to the studio, and he had temped it himself. And he had done what I consider to be one of the best jobs of source temping I'd ever seen. So we started to develop a relationship there, and through the course of the film, because there was no budget for those particular pieces of music, we showed it to an audience with the studio, and the audience responded so positively that they came up with the money to license the music, which was a battle for us. And then we created a song for the end titles with Joe Cocker and Jennifer Warnes. Will Jennings wrote it with Jack Nietzsche and Buffy St. Marie. It was called Up Where We Belong.
Smash.
And it was taken out of the studio. It was taken out of the film by the president of the studio because he thought Cocker was drunk, which he was. So he was, his logic was fine, but his selection was wrong. Anyway, we finally got it back into the film about a week before we dubbed the movie, and eventually the record came out about 6 weeks in front of the movie. It was very successful, and it helped the studio change its perception on how to market movies, because the music appealed to the same demographic that they wanted the film to appeal to. And that was our goal. And Taylor and I, through the trials and tribulations, became terrific friends. To this day, we still work together. And even if he was doing a film in another studio, he'd call me in to take a look at it. So the relationship developed through trust and a collaboration in which you can get inspired by somebody else challenging you to do better. And I always appreciated that about Taylor, and I do to this day.
That's great. Let's hear it for Joel Sill, ladies and gentlemen. So this next young fella has also been at this game a long time and has put to me some of the greatest music moments, much like Joel and Bonnie have, out there into the world in their films. And again, sticking on the theme of relationships, he struck up a relationship with a guy named Oliver Stone, who's one of the most interesting, controversial filmmakers of the last 30 years. I believe it started, 4th of July was the first one? Or is there another one? Was there another one before that? Salvador. So, but I wanted to ask you a couple things. First of all, again, same thing on the relationship, but also when I went back and listened to 4th of July, I noticed it was mostly originals, but there were a couple interesting covers on there. And Edie Brickell did one, and I think Broken Homes did one. Talk about, again, the relationship, building that relationship up, and the diplomacy with what could be known as, could be a difficult filmmaker on some levels, but a super talented one. So talk about that relationship and the birth of it and bridging it.
Thanks for the kind words. It's interesting to follow these two people who, certainly as you go along in your career, you do admire work, and both of them, you know, I'd say Joel, who I was fortunate enough to be partners with for a while, you know, you teach and you learn. So segueing into the Oliver was the beginning of my music supervision career. I'd done one movie before that called Terminator, and it became, and I think that part of the panel discussion of diplomacy is not always do you develop a friendship or a relationship with somebody. Diplomatically, Oliver, when I first met him, was in actually over 9900 Sunset. I went up to his office. It was on Salvador, and I walked in and he looked at me and said, "Where are your gold chains?" And that's just his personality. His personality is to put you in defense. You feel insecure immediately, and you know, so I obviously reacted to exactly that. I was insecure. I mean, what I'm doing, I have no idea what you want me to do. I was just, and so the relationship that we've had over the years has been one of parry and foil. And I think you find in whatever you're doing, some days are good with somebody, some days are not good with somebody, and how do you diplomatically move to the point of why the hell you're in the room? Because, you know, sometimes you may be hanging out, most of the times you're being asked to do something, and the analysis of how to figure out whether you can do it or whether you can't do it, and then how do you explain to them that you can't do it? One of the things I learned in my early relationships with Oliver, he didn't understand the word no. As a director, that's just the way it was. So part of my early career was understanding that if someone at a record label or a songwriter or a publisher said no, I didn't understand it either. So you had to take the ability of figuring out, what do you do next? How do you motivate it? How do you go behind their back? You know, there's a common thing that, you know, people say, well, you know Eminem, you know Marshall, just call him. Well, yeah, but then the four people that are guarding that tent are going to be pissed at you because you went behind their back, and then they're going to do everything they can to see to it that doesn't happen. So if we're talking about the panel structure.
Yeah, well, diplomacy, this is a perfect,
That's
again, you work for him, your job is to only get yes, but no's are everywhere, considering what people have to do with, they protect their people, so this is a great piece.
One of the things that, again, you learn early on, this is, I think it's a David Geffen quote, the best idea you ever have is somebody else's idea. So that the more you think that it's the clearance person's idea, that, shit, if I can get this done, man, it'd be great. So how do you make them the hero? How do you go about it? Because you're gonna have to walk back into a room in a relationship that you're hopefully gonna cultivate, either with your studio that you're working for, or the director you're working for, whoever it is that's decider, which is always, I said this in a call we did, you need to know who you're working for. The key thing is, you know, if you're gonna go sell your soul for somebody, make sure that that someone, if necessary, will cover your ass. And 25, I think it's 26 movies with Oliver, there have been points where he stood up for me. Not often, but it challenged you, you know, and when you talk about songs or experiences, I can tell stories about various songs along the way, but the key point of a relationship is being diplomatic, and when you can actually look at him and say no, and he has to finally understand, actually, that's a no, you know, and so, okay, you said no, so now what are you gonna do, because it's no longer his fault. So that's.
So when that no happens, and it is a definitive no, and the artist does not want to do what he wants them to do you first come up with an alternative plan to pitch? Or how will you work with the psychology of knowing that this guy does not want to hear no, but occasionally he must hear it?
Again, I go back to the fact that I don't take no easy anymore, and I think I learned that from that relationship. So when you say you can't get it done, and someone says, no, you need to get it done, then you go sit in your room and figure out how to do it. Who can you motivate to, this is a really good idea, or is it possible to motivate? You know, there are numerous times along the way, we had situations in Natural Born Killers. I mean, there's 83 songs in that movie, and they're layered. It's before the term, you know, moshing and mashing and all that.
Mash up.
Yeah, we just kind of layered songs on top of each other. So each of those needed not only the approval of the license, but then the approval of the other person that you could lay it over their song. So you find these things at a particular point that you do end up having to make a relationship where you can reach out and all these guys have these type of relationships, and I'm fortunate to have them as well, that you can make a call to Bob Dylan's manager and say, I'm doing a movie about mercury poisoning in Japan, and I know Bob knows Johnny Depp, and so do you want me to have Johnny ask Bob, or do you want to do it? So that you engage situations that you don't get a phone call that says, okay, so why does Bob have to tell me about this if you're supervising the movie? So again, you just have to play the cards effectively, so the point at which when somebody wants something from you, that you can deliver.
So Bonnie, talk about, because you really work intrinsically, you know, obviously the idea that music supervisors just pick clear music and work with people like Evan to help clear or do it themselves. But the relationship with the composer and the supervisor is vital. They share, they're pushing for their music to be in certain spots against each other sometimes, because again, the more songs that, the more score that a composer has in a film, the more money they theoretically can make on the back end. So every song in a way could take away from that revenue stream. So there's always that level. And it used to be that I think composers and supervisors were more, I don't want to say adversarial, but I know for us as people who are music supervisors now in the TV Academy, it took years for us to even get recognized to get in there, and due to the help of some people like Michael and some other people in the TV Academy, we are now members of the TV Academy, which is an amazing thing. But old habits die hard. So talk about composers.
Okay, well, first I gotta take personal umbrage to that comment about the battle between, because if you're,
It used to be perhaps more.
what I'm even gonna take, and the TV camera is a whole other thing too, because in TV, music supervisors tend to be mostly song people. And that is how it's being posed, and that's how the Academy's representing it and stuff. And the truth is, in the real world, that isn't how it is, and it may be in television. But in features, when you're music supervising the music in a film, that means the music in the film, whatever that means. And often there's no songs at all, it's just score. And the temp process, which we actually have a panel later today, and I'm moderating about the temp process, when you're figuring out what kind of music and what the tone of music and where there's songs, where there's score, if there's only score, and what it will be is a very long creative process to then figuring out what kind of composer should come on board. Where I find the diplomacy issue that's come up with composers is, so I'm very involved in the process of who the composer will be, and I'll bring a few people in to interview with the director. And that's not based on a reel, which I appreciate composer agents and people sending music, but to me that's somewhat meaningless, because Mozart might not have been a film composer. You know, being able to write beautiful music is not the same thing as being able to tell story with music and using music to enhance emotions and things that are happening on the screen. So it's really nice to hear some music, but I want to see what they've done with it. And the reason we have meetings set up with a director and a composer is to see if they're on the same page as how they experience the film. You know, a director may think he's made a black comedy, and a composer may come in and think it's a thriller or something. I mean, that's an extreme example, which is unlikely to happen, but I want a composer to be able to watch a movie and sit with the director and talk about it and see how they feel about it and how the director feels about it. Because going with the diplomacy, since this is what this is about, one of the key things there is about communication. And if a director and a composer are unable to communicate with each other, there's no point in them getting the gig. Like if you're hiring someone to decorate your home, if you can't communicate what the furniture, what the style, what you want that room to feel like, no decorator's gonna be able to deliver that for you. And if the director brings the wrong couch, you have to be able to say, that couch isn't working for me. So I've been in situations, you know, like Joel, like Bud, directors I've worked with. I worked with P.J. Hogan for over 20 years and done every film with him. And sometimes, and when we first went with the composer, I mean, PJ didn't think there would be any score in that movie, and that's a whole nother story for another panel. He actually said, well, why don't you just figure it out and let me know? And then
Which movie are you talking about?
it was my best friend's wedding. And when I sat and wrote out the spotting notes for the score by myself, and I hired Andrew Silver as a music editor, and he would say to me, well, what exactly does this note mean? What does he mean by this? And I said, there is no he, that's me. He said, what are you talking about? I said, he doesn't think there's score. We have to show them there is. There ended up being, I think, 72 minutes of score in that film. And actually, there was only going to be one song in that film, and that spot became a scored spot. And, you know, there were a lot of songs in that movie. But, and anyway, once we spotted it, so I said, oh, wow, okay. So then we brought in a few composers, and we ultimately hired James Newton Howard, who has gone on to do every film with PJ and I since then. And PJ, despite this long-term relationship with James, who is one of the brilliant film composers, in my opinion, an incredible talent and genius and charming, he still is not comfortable saying a cue is not working. Now, of course, that's not helped by the fact that James introduces every cue as this is the greatest cue I've ever written in my lifetime. So you're sitting there about to hear the demo of whatever this cue is, and you have that preface. So you have that preface by this brilliant composer, a director who's already uncomfortable saying he doesn't like something, and me. So if a cue's not working, generally my approach in these situations, and I assume it's for these guys as well, I don't speak unless there's a point I need to. I consider it that it's really the director and the composer, and unless there's some problem, and then I interject. PJ will invariably elbow me and want me to be the one who says to
That's
James.
also rare, but I do want to jump in there for a second. And the nuanced nature of this business, where you're in a room with these powerful people who this movie is their life, and they've gotten this movie made into the point, or the TV show, whatever it is. And it's a question of when, the nuance of when you actually step up and give your opinion or not, whether it's positive or a negative, is a really interesting thing. And so that's where this level of skill in this business, and you teach, you can't really teach nuance, but it's something that you always got to think about, that when you're in these situations, or you get in any sort of business situation, that you need to filter everything you say first, because you don't want to just blurt out something that could be totally wrong and turn the people off from you. So
Right.
this
As a
is
therapist, I
different.
will actually say it's the classic stimulus, pause, response. And then you want to build in that pause, like where you want to say something, like, well,
Take a
hold
breath.
back. So, oh,
I'm just gonna follow up. I mean, if we utilize the word diplomacy and then say, you know, what we look at in our diplomats, and you understand that most of them do not answer a question when they're asked.
okay, I actually really answer
They can
questions.
skirt- they can skirt around it.
The point of reference for saying this is that I've been in, all of us have been in the situation where, you know, either the director or the composer, if it's a three-person meeting that you've described, turns and says, so John, what do you think?
Yeah, right, exactly. What do you think, Mike?
And learning what not to say is more important than learning what to say.
Right, and then the flip side of that is I was in a film years ago, a film that I quite love, called Pleasantville, and Gary Ross, myself, the director, and myself were over at Randy Newman's house, and Randy just plays his cues on the piano. He just plays a melody on the piano. He doesn't do, or then, I don't know, today he might do a full demo, and he's playing this cue, and it's just not, something's not working about it for Gary. I kind of know what's not working about it for Gary, but it's not really, like, let's say, it wasn't my moment yet. And Gary keeps saying, try this, and Randy does something, going, no. And the tension is building, because Gary thinks he's communicating why it's not working, and Randy's trying to communicate how to accomplish what Gary's asking for, and it's not working. And finally, I said something like, and this is not exactly what I said, but you'll get the gist. You know, Gary, I think if you went blah, 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 E flat, F, that you might accomplish it. Like, I actually said two specific notes. And he played them, and Gary goes, oh my God, that's it. But I didn't say a word the whole time. And then right at that moment, I saw the solution. As we're leaving, Gary Ross says to me, and this is a period movie with tons of songs, he turns to me and he says, if you do nothing else on this movie, but what you just did in there with that comment about the notes, you've earned your paycheck.
So, and that right there is why music supervisors are translators in a way. We have to deal with labels, publishers, composers, music editors, studios, TV companies, all across the board, and you have to be able to speak well, intelligently, make sure your paperwork's together, make sure your responses are correct. You know, there's a lot to the nuance of the game.
And their agendas are often
And
very
everybody has
differently.
different agendas, that's the other thing. Evan, you had something to say?
Bonnie got on the cue sheet for that cue, right? You got 25%. That's what was going through my mind.
That
Hey,
didn't happen.
I changed that. No, how much? This is what I get.
That didn't
all the
happen.
time.
But I do, I
that
do
word.
think, and these guys will probably talk about that, one of the biggest issues I found in the world of diplomacy had to do with studio, director, filmmaker, record company at the time when records were really big.
Yeah, I had that,
Because
that's
the record
another.
The record company wants to sell records, the
That's
film
another
company wants
entire
seats in the
panel.
theater.
Yeah, and that's another entire panel, but those days are over in a way, but I
Thank
did
God.
use the reference when we did Truth About Cats and Dogs, where, you know, Suzanne Vega writes a song, that's a beautiful song, and it works for the film, but it's not a hit. And it labels like, the president's like, dude, what are we gonna do with this? It's like, it works for the movie, you know, but it's hard because those balances are not what they used to be. The label's point of view is no longer as integral as it was. So, which is good in a way because it gets back to just the song for the film and the show.
That also had to do with, I think, financing of motion pictures too, back then when we were referring to, record companies were writing big checks.
Right.
So then they were your partner.
Speaking of that, Gump. So Forrest Gump, one of the greatest selling soundtracks of all time, sold 8 million copies. Talk about when that movie was done, what the original concept was for music in that movie.
Paramount gave us a budget for 2 songs in the film, and again, it was Bob Zemeckis, and we decided to attempt the whole film with the accurate period piece songs as a 4th character in the film, and when we played it for an audience, they really responded to the music. The studio responded. And the problem was, we only had 6 weeks to clear 50-some songs and records. And the tricky thing was, again, the clearance process.
And no email.
Oh, right,
No email.
email.
Did they even have
Yeah,
fax
right.
back then? Was it 80? Was it 85?
I'm sorry?
What year was it? Let's go.
85.
Okay, 85.
Yeah.
See, I was just gonna throw historical notes here. The fax machine was not in common use until 1987, right? The G2 fax machine,
No.
like the one with the paper that kept going. Most of the people in the room don't even remember this. So when we did this back then, it was
We did have
phone
telephones.
calls.
Yeah, but telephone takes a lot more time than.
Nobody did it in writing. It was a lot of good faith.
You had to reach everyone on the phone.
Yeah, we had, what we did, came up with the idea that if we engaged all the music clearance people from the publishing companies and the record companies, and the director was on board, which he was, it was risky, we brought them all into a screening, all the clearance people. And the film wasn't done. And we showed it to everybody and said, we've already contacted you, we want to clear all of this music, but we don't have time, we'd like you to see the film. And they felt engaged, and that changed the tone of all the phone calls, literally, because they responded as being a part of the project effectively.
Diplomacy.
But it's also engagement. You use the word engagement.
Yeah, that was important.
And like, I remember an experience where I had a small movie and I had Somewhere Over the Rainbow. My brother is from one of the Hawaii legend artists, and I thought the song was tired, but yet people cried when the scene came up in the movie. So Pat Lucas like, there's no way at EMI you can't have the song for $5,000. Not gonna have Pat. Look, you just gotta come see the movie, right? She's like, oh. I set up a screening room in her building, so she had to come. It was that easy. She walked out, she was crying. She's like, all right, I got it done. So there's nothing like the power of the visual to get people excited. And that's what the best process is. I want to flip over to Evan for a second on the clearance side, because your job, your business relies on you getting those clearances done. And so the aspect of your diplomacy level and your relationships and your staff's relationships with the license holders, talk about that and how you employ that, and then obviously jump into one of the great uses of all time, which we may or may not have time to show, about The Sopranos ending.
Yeah, so our game is a little different in that our clients usually will come to us with music selections. Like there's a whole team at Ellen who picks the songs. We get 1,000 songs in June that they hope to start running in September. So we're just getting into that process. And we will give them an honest assessment. You know, this Marshall Mathers song is probably not going to clear for an Ellen Walk-On, or Jay-Z, or Beyonce, or no, you can't have, Beatles masters will not clear, ever, unless it's a Beatles film. If the Beatles are involved, you can do it. We had, when Paul McCartney won his, he was nominated for an Oscar for Vanilla Sky. I cleared a Beatles master. I'm the only guy who's ever done it for the Oscars, because McCartney was there. So a lot of our job is just expectation management with our clients and saying, this is probably not going to happen based on our experience. And then the question is, okay, what can, as Bud was saying, what can be done? Is there a relationship in place? Can somebody make a phone call? Does somebody know somebody? In which case the game can really change. And that's what our diplomacy is about, is right off the bat saying to a client, is this actually doable in the time frame, in the budget that you have, based on our experience, and not promising them something that can't be done.
And I would also think that your relationship for clearance is that since this is about diplomacy, that it's really key that all the, not your clients, but all the publishers and the record companies know who you are, know you're forthright, know you're honest, that when you say, I only have this much money, it's a really low budget
That's a
film.
huge point.
That they know you're telling the truth, and that, okay, I have a lot of money here, I can pay you more, so that they know you're not bullshitting with them, like, you really don't have the money, so please help me on this one. And here I do have the money, so I'm gonna give you, your big check.
We've actually been on projects that were cleared by others, and they said there was favored nations, and we start going through the licenses and said, well, wait, this guy got more than that guy, and this label got more than the publisher, and. You can't do business that way, because once, it's like in court, once you're proven to be a liar, then your whole testimony can be thrown out. If you do a deal and you're found to have misrepresented anything, the relation, you can pretty much forget about it. I was going to tell another quick Sopranos story. Maybe this is a good segue. Do we have time for Sopranos? So in doing the Sopranos, that show really spanned the whole evolution of media. We started out clearing 5 years, US, Canada, HBO only. And after the end of the first season, they said, well, this thing has taken off bigger than we expected, so maybe you should go back and get 5 years worldwide. And then the video deal was made. They said, well, maybe you should get all TV and home video. Get an option for home video, because there's a lot of money to pay for. And the season 1 of Sopranos, we cleared like 5 times, because the rights kept expanding. And then later on, when the digital iPhone came out, 2005, there was a secret deal between Apple and HBO, and they were going to have an HBO video area. And of course, we're saying, you telling me people are going to watch video on their phone? What an idea that is. So we had to go back. Anyway, there was another problem with Sopranos, which was, does everybody know what dailies are? You all know what it is. So when they were shooting Sopranos, they would shoot these dailies, and they would ship the tapes from New York to LA for the executives to view them. And the tapes started disappearing. People at FedEx or the delivery companies, things started disappearing. Then they'd wind up in places they weren't supposed to. So they started renaming it. They said they would name it, butterflies and buttercups. That didn't work. So after a period of time, they stopped. And of course, then digital came along, about season 5, around 99, 2000. They were able to ship these things digitally. Those two started disappearing. And it got to the point where David Chase picked pretty much every song in Sopranos. He was presented with choices. He had a team, and then he would make the final choices. He would not submit key scenes to anybody at HBO, to the point where he said, I cannot risk this getting out. I cannot risk this being revealed under. So they put in black. They put in like slugs. So there was this 15-minute conversation between the control people saying, there's a slug. Yes, there's a slug. What's supposed to be there? A slug. Now I know there's a slug. What's supposed to be there? There's a slug. It was like who's on first? The morning after, there's a news story, and Steve Curry had done an interview, and he goes, I knew how The Sopranos ended, and I would never have allowed the song to be used if Tony Soprano meant the death of Tony Soprano. And I get a call from like some senior guy in New York legal. I'd never even spoken to him. He goes, "What the fuck did you do?" What are you talking about? He says, "Steve Perry says he knew the ending of Sopranos. No one's supposed to know the ending of Sopranos. What the fuck did you people?" Wait a minute. So I pull out our request, and the producers were notoriously scant on detail just for this reason. They didn't want things being released. I have another story about that in a second. I said, "Here's what we told them. Tony sits at a diner. The song plays on the jukebox. Not, this is the final ending of The Sopranos. This is the final scene people will ever see." Then we figured out, we started looking, wondering who published this story, and it was some like bogus news organization. It was not the New York Times. It was not some. It was
Fake news.
It was fake news. So Steve, anybody? Steve Curry here? What we think was, he was so jazzed that this turned out to be, his song underscored the final scene of The Sopranos, that he was going to get some press on it, and he said, "I knew the ending." He didn't know the ending, but he got some
He
press.
was just taking a shot at press. All right, we only have 5 minutes left, so I want to take a couple questions. So, hands, yes, in the back.
Hi, Joe. Oops.
Hey.
So what's,
Anything you want.
all right. Put my music in some of your moves. Was the music in the beginning of Contact periodically accurate? So like,
Yes.
by the time it got to Jupiter, was that the 60s?
To the best of what we could calculate
Uh-huh.
at the speed of sound
Right,
going through space.
right.
Not the speed of light.
No, sound is way slower than light.
Right, 720 miles an hour.
Who else? Yes, up front.
How important do you think the youth is when it comes to future music supervision?
Say it again.
How important do you think the youth is when it comes to the future music?
Youth as in young. The question was, how important do you think youth is?
Yeah,
Like young people,
Young
you.
like a 23-year-old.
You're it, man. You're the future.
You mean in terms of becoming a music supervisor?
Yes, like how important do you think it is to show that?
I think it's becoming more important. There's a bigger landscape for everybody to work in. There are more platforms. There's more need and there's more recognition. So I think it's a great time for that.
There's so much more content that's being made, and there's just not enough people to do it correctly. I get the opportunity, thanks to invitations like this, to talk about how you get started. Joel and I had to learn. We didn't get a chance to, we didn't get a chance to, have somebody teach us what to do. You can still do that today, for sure, but the people you need to learn from are the people that are going to provide you with the content to give to your director, your writer, that kind of. You need to spend time learning about who does clearances, how clearances are done, what it means to do a clearance, because the odds are the first job you get is not going to be a situation where you're going to have the ability to have an Evan or have a studio. It's going to be some
You
friend
might do
filmmaker of
administrative
yours that-
stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that really, the key thing of what's said is that it's true. When the three of us are, there wasn't anyone really to learn from. We all kind of had to learn on our own. Whereas you say there's so many music supervisors, people you could go in, you can intern for, it's just more, you can really learn how things get done, as opposed to learning from mistakes. And interesting enough, what the panel originally was going to be, which that may be why you thought that, is we originally were gonna have a panel about mistakes we've made, to show that, and then somehow it changed, and it was gonna be some kind of senior music supervisors and
You've
younger
made
ones
mistakes.
talking about mistakes and how to learn from mistakes, or how you make mistakes, so people understand you're gonna make mistakes, and that it's kind of okay, you can still succeed. And different mistakes have been made, so either the audience can learn from them and perhaps not make that mistake, or just be comfortable with the concept that you're gonna make mistakes as you learn. But there's a lot of people you can learn under now.
We have one more.
Follow-up question for Joel on the opening of Contact. Was there ever any talk of just relying on a fair use defense and not clearing? Because those segments are, less than a second each. And if you didn't discuss, just relying on fair use, why not?
Well, the fair use doctrine is a good one. The problem is, it didn't necessarily apply because this was a for-profit film. And based on that, it was not based on for the betterment of society. Consequently, we run into copyright infringement.
Fair use is also
There's lot
a
of
United
lawsuits.
States concept that doesn't exist outside the United States.
All right, one last one? Yes, ma'am.
This is for Bonnie. What made you want to leave music supervision and become a psychologist? I mean, it's amazing, but.
You are a
Easier gig, much easier
psychologist
gig.
as a music supervisor.
In 2 minutes or less.
I don't really actually know quite how to answer that, but that, I don't know, I had a young child. I'd had experience of some very serious, losses in my life. I lost a lot of family members in very, short proximity. And I just wanted to get more about doing things that could make a difference in the world and where I had more control of my time. I mean, one of the things about music supervision, at least in the future world, is it is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. And I was now a single parent. I split up with my kid's father, and I didn't really feel I was being a great mom by being away working all the time. I was on location a lot, and I just wanted to do something that had me be more present and yet also could make a difference in the world.
Great
Thank
question.
you.
So give it up for these esteemed panelists. Thank you guys for coming. And enjoy the rest of the day.